All right, let's talk about something every single one of us who tries to create has to deal with. That's right, we are tackling creative block. And we're going to build a scientific toolkit to get past it, not by trying to punch through a wall, but by actually understanding what's going on. Okay, let's get into it. Ugh, this. We've all been there, right? That awful, paralyzing moment when you're staring at the screen or the page and the idea is just stop. It's so frustrating, it can feel demoralizing, and man, does it feel personal. But listen, and this is probably the most important thing to get right off the bat. It is not you. This isn't a sign that you've lost your talent or that you're lazy. It's just a totally normal and honestly an inevitable part of being a creative person. And it has a real-world cost. Get this, the average creative professional loses 3 to 5 hours every single week to creative block. Just think about that for a second. That could be over 200 hours a year where all that great momentum just disappears. So this is the big mental shift we have to make. What if we just stopped treating this like some deep personal failing and instead started seeing it for what it actually is, a specific, measurable brain state, one that we can actually learn to change? Okay, so let's pull back the curtain and look at the science of being stuck. Because honestly, once you understand the why, the how to fix it starts to make a whole lot more sense. It really isn't you, it's just your brain doing its thing. The fancy scientific term for this state is hyperfrontality. Basically, what's happening is your prefrontal cortex, think of it as the CEO of your brain, gets way too controlling. It becomes this overzealous micromanager, policing every single thought and shooting down new ideas before they even get a chance to breathe. And you can really see the difference between the two states right here. When you're stuck, that analytical, editor part of the brain is on high alert, judging everything. But when you're in that magical state of flow, that same part of the brain quiets right down, which allows for all those cool, unexpected connections. Our whole mission is to learn how to shift from stuck over to flow. So what flips that switch? What sends our brain into that critical lockdown mode? Well, it's pretty much all the usual suspects, isn't it? That crushing pressure to be perfect, being terrified of getting it wrong, or just being plain old exhausted. These feelings are basically the biological triggers that turn on that overzealous editor in your head. Okay, now for the good stuff. Let's get practical. This first set of tools is what we're going to call your active toolkit. This is for those moments when you have the energy, you want to work, but your brain is just spinning its wheels in the mud. This is all about forging a path when there isn't one. First up, free writing. Seriously, this one is such a simple game changer. Just set a timer for 5 or 10 minutes and write. The only rule is you can't stop. If you don't know what to write, you literally write, "I don't know what to write," over and over. The goal is not to create a masterpiece. The goal is just pure momentum. It's about getting the engine started again. Okay, next tool, let's say you have an idea, but it just feels stale. This is where you use the scamper method. It's like a structured brainstorming session with yourself. It gives you 7 different verbs, 7 different ways to look at your idea and force your brain to find new pathways. And if you want a killer real-world example, just look at Netflix. First, they substituted brick-and-mortar stores with mail-order DVDs. Then, years later, they substituted the DVDs with streaming. It's that constant questioning of what can we change here that leads to breakthroughs. That is Scamper in a nutshell. Now, this next one is going to sound a little backward, but trust me, it works wonders. Instead of infinite possibilities, you intentionally give yourself strict limitations. See, a blank page is actually kind of terrifying, but a very specific puzzle, that's engaging. Constraints don't kill creativity, they focus it. And if you don't believe me, think about this. Green Eggs and Ham, one of the most famous children's books in history, was the result of a bet. Dr. Seuss was challenged to write a book using only 50 distinct words. That severe limitation forced him to be wildly inventive, and the result is an absolute classic. Okay, so that was the toolkit for when you're feeling active but stuck. But what about when you're just toast, when the block is coming from pure burnout? Well, that's when we need to open up our second toolkit, the restorative toolkit. And it's all about the power of stepping away. And we really have to get this straight. Taking a strategic break is not laziness. It's not the absence of work, it's just a different kind of work. When you consciously disengage, you're actually giving your subconscious mind the space it needs to do its thing and connect the dots in the background. So here's how to do it right. You need to engage in something that occupies you physically but lets your mind wander. Things like taking a walk, having a shower, doing the dishes. This activates what neuroscientists call the default mode network, which is basically your brain's aha generator. Just make sure you have a way to capture the idea when it strikes. And sometimes, you know what? Your brain is just plain tired of looking at the same four walls. A simple change of scenery can flood your brain with new sensory inputs, and that can be enough to spark new connections. You don't need a vacation. Even just working from a coffee shop for an afternoon can do the trick. Okay, let's bring this all home. The big goal here is to completely change our relationship with creative block. We need to move from seeing it as this frustrating, immovable roadblock to seeing it as a useful signal. And let's be real, creative blocks are going to happen. The goal isn't to somehow become so brilliant that you never get stuck again. No, the real skill is building a resilient system for yourself so you know how to navigate the block when it inevitably shows up. So think of this as your personal diagnostic guide. Start by asking yourself, how do I actually feel right now? If you feel totally blank, maybe try free writing. If you feel completely burned out and fatigued, that's a crystal clear sign it's time for a strategic break. You match the tool to the feeling. And ultimately, you should think of these techniques not just as emergency fixes, but as a regular workout routine for your brain. Creativity really is like a muscle. The more you practice these things when you're not stuck, the stronger that muscle gets and the easier it is to use when you really need it. So I want to leave you with one final thought, a complete reframing of this whole experience. What if that feeling of being stuck? What if it isn't a wall that's been built in front of you? What if, instead, it's a compass, a signal that's pointing you in a new direction? Maybe it's telling you it's time to rest, or it's time to bring in a collaborator, or it's time to try a totally different approach. When you see it that way, a creative block stops being an enemy and it becomes your guide.